Welcome back to the Oscar Project Podcast, the show where I discuss Oscar-nominated films year by year. I'm your host, Jonathan Eaterberg, and today I'm going over all the films I've covered from the first Academy Awards, reviewing which film won each category, giving my own thoughts on the films, and I'll finish up with a final ranking of all of the films that I watched for this project. When you hear this episode, I will be deep in the preparation phase for the films nominated at the second Academy Awards, so if you are interested in being a guest on the podcast to talk about one of those films, send me a message at the link in the show notes. As always, please be sure to subscribe to the show in your podcast player so you can get all the newest episodes as soon as they are released. And don't forget to leave a rating and review in Apple Podcasts or Spotify. So let's run through the categories first. We'll start off with Best Engineering Effects. 3 individuals were nominated. Nugent Slaughter and Ralph Hammerus were both nominated, but not for any specific film. The third nomination went to Roy Pomeroy for his work on Wings, which won the award and was very deserving. As Kevin Pettit and I talked about on the previous episode, the effects in the film are incredible for the time, and it's often difficult to know if scenes are done with real planes or models. Best Cinematography had 4 nominations, only 2 of which I was able to watch. George Barnes was nominated for 3 separate films. The Devil Dancer and Magic Flame are both considered lost, but Sadie Thompson survives and was covered on an episode last March. However, even with 3 nominations, Barnes didn't win, with the award going to Charles Rocher and Carl Strauss for Sunrise, A Song of Two Humans, which I just discussed a few weeks ago. For Best Art Direction, William Cameron Menzies received the award for his work on 2 films, Tempest and The Dove. The other 2 nominations went to Harry Oliver for Seventh Heaven and Rochus Glees for Sunrise. Out of these, the only one I haven't seen is The Dove, as the only known prints are housed at the Library of Congress and the Swedish Film Institute. If you have any connections at either of those places, let me know. There were 3 categories for writing at the first Academy Awards. In the Best Title Writing category, George Marion Jr. was nominated, but not for any specific film, and Gerald Duffy was nominated for The Private Life of Helen of Troy. That film only has about a half hour that survives at the British Film Institute, and Duffy has the dubious distinction of being the first person to be posthumously nominated for an Academy Award. Helen of Troy also remains the only film specifically named for Best Title Writing, since the category was dropped the following year as sound films took over the industry. The award for Best Title Writing went to Joseph Farnham, again for no specific film, though he has almost a dozen credits on films from 1927 and 1928, including The Show, Slide Kelly Slide, and London After Midnight. In the Best Writing Adaptation category, we had 3 nominees for 3 films. The nominees were Alfred Cohen for The Jazz Singer, based on the play of the same name by Samson Raphaelson, Anthony Coldway for Glorious Betsy, based on the play of the same name by Rita Johnson Young, and winner Benjamin Glazer for Seventh Heaven, based on the play of the same name by Austin Strong. I saw The Jazz Singer and Seventh Heaven and read the play version of The Jazz Singer. I had The Jazz Singer above Seventh Heaven both as an overall film and in terms of the story itself. After chatting with Maria Banson last week about Seventh Heaven, though, I think I might need to revisit it and see what I missed the first time around. Interestingly, Glorious Betsy was not available for viewing when I first started this project, and I'm hoping to circle back to it as a special episode before I get to the second Academy Awards later this spring. The last writing category was Best Writing Original Story. The nominees were Charlie Chaplin for The Circus, Lejos Biro for The Last Command, and winner Ben Hecht for Underworld. Again, I had The Last Command and The Circus above Underworld in terms of story, but considering Chaplin was removed from the competitive categories, I would still consider The Last Command a better written story than Underworld. Moving into the top 6 categories, the nominees for Best Actress were Gloria Swanson, appearing as Sadie Thompson in Sadie Thompson, Louise Dresser as Mrs. Plesnick in A Ship Comes In, and Janet Gaynor, who won the award for 3 roles, Diane in Seventh Heaven, Angela in Street Angel, and The Wife in Sunrise. It's hard to argue with the output of Gaynor in 1927 and 1928, but I preferred Swanson's performance of Sadie Thompson more than any of Gaynor's roles, and it's a shame to me that Swanson would never receive an Academy Award, though she would be nominated twice more. There were originally 3 nominees for Best Actor, but we again have to discount Chaplin for his role as a tramp in The Circus. Richard Barthelmess was nominated for 2 roles, Nicky Elkins in The Noose, and the Patent Leather Kid in the film of the same name. Winner Emil Jannings was also nominated for 2 roles, General Dolgoriki / Grand Duke Sergius Alexander in The Last Command, and August Schilling in The Way of All Flesh. I only have references for one performance for Jennings and Barthelmess, but I would honestly have a hard time separating the two. Perhaps the other two films would have helped me elevate one over the other. That said, if the original nominees were an option, I would pick Chaplin over both of them for the win. The first Oscar ceremony was the only one to hand out 2 awards for Best Director. In Best Directing Comedy Picture, the nominees were Chaplin for The Circus, Ted Wilde for Speedy, and winner Louis Milestone for 2 Arabian Nights. As I mentioned in my episode about 2 Arabian Nights back in January, I preferred both The Circus and Speedy over the winner. They were simply funnier, which to me is an important part of directing a comedy picture. 2 Arabian Nights had a few laugh-out-loud moments, but the other 2 were some of the biggest names in slapstick comedy of the day, and if The Circus wasn't an option, the award should have gone to Speedy, no questions. For Best Directing Dramatic Picture, the nominees were King Vidor for The Crowd, Herbert Brennan for Sorrel & Son, and Frank Borzage for Seventh Heaven, which was the winner. Sorrel & Son is not readily available at this time, so my decision comes down to Seventh Heaven and The Crowd, and when it comes to direction, I would again put The Crowd slightly higher. I'm not sure if Seventh Heaven just didn't connect with me for whatever reason, but I don't see how it landed all these awards other than being the first time that Janet Gaynor and Charles Farrell were paired together on screen. And that brings me to the top 2 awards, splitting what we now call Best Picture. I'll start with Best Unique and Artistic Picture with 3 films nominated: The Crowd from Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, Chang, A Drama of the Wilderness from Paramount Famous Lasky, and the winner, Sunrise from Fox. Out of these 3, I agree that Sunrise is the best and probably the one that stands the test of time the best as well. As we discussed in our conversation about the film a few weeks back, it starts off by telling the viewer how it is a timeless tale. Chang is a bit problematic today, though an interesting look at a certain part of the world roughly 100 years ago. The Crowd is a close second in this category for me, and while it is impressive in its scope, Sunrise takes more risks in terms of editing and experimenting, all of which work to further the story, which elevates it slightly in my eyes. Which brings me to the final category, and the one that the Academy retroactively named as the Best Picture. The 3 nominees for Outstanding Picture at the first Academy Awards were Seventh Heaven from Fox, The Racket from The Caddo Company, and Wings from Paramount Famous Lasky, which won the award and is considered to be the first Best Picture winner. I think I've made my thoughts on Seventh Heaven pretty clear already in this episode, but I'm a bit at a loss as to how The Racket ended up in this category despite not showing up anywhere else. The most recent example of this I can think of was Past Lives just last year, getting a Best Picture nomination, but only showing up elsewhere in Best Original Screenplay. A quick aside, I applaud both of these nominations and had Past Lives as one of my top films of 2023, and personally think it should have received more nominations, but that's a conversation for another day. As I'll go over in a minute when I rank the films, The Racket was one of my least favorite of the bunch, and I can think of several which should have been in its place in this top category. And obviously, I just had a lengthy conversation about Wings on my previous episode, and I can't argue one bit with naming this the best picture of the year. And with that, I want to give my personal rankings of all the films. Before I do that, just a reminder that the lost or unavailable films not included in this ranking are Sorrel & Son, The Way of All Flesh, The Noose, The Dove, The Devil Dancer, The Magic Flame, and The Private Life of Helen of Troy. As I mentioned earlier, Glorious Betsy was not originally included in the set of films I discussed this season, as it was not available when I started the project. But I did find a version on YouTube recently, and will hopefully be bringing a conversation about this film to the podcast soon after this year's Academy Awards wrap up in a few weeks. Before I give my rankings and ratings, I rate all of my films on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the highest. I rate films in categories like directing, acting, cinematography, editing, music, and visual effects, and I cap that off with an enjoyment category. I average all those together to come up with my final rating, which often needs to be rounded up or down to give a specific number. So while many of these films have the same number rating, know that they are ordered by their averages according to those calculations. In 17th, the only film to receive a 5 out of 10, A Ship Comes In. To be fair, only parts of this film survive, so perhaps an incomplete grade would be more appropriate, but based on what I saw, this film didn't quite stand up to the rest. In 16th, I would give The Racket a 6 out of 10, and a low 6 at that. As I mentioned just a moment ago, I really didn't enjoy this film much at all, and thought the source material it was based on was much better. My number 15 film of the first Oscars is Tempest, also receiving a 6. It had some memorable moments, but also dragged terribly in the second half. That said, I can't argue with the win for Best Art Direction, as some of the sets are absolutely incredible. Rounding out the films getting 6s are Underworld in 14th and Seventh Heaven in 13th. Both were category winners, and while they are decent films, I felt that there were several that were better. My first 7 goes to Two Arabian Nights in 12th place. Like the 2 previous films, it was okay, but in the end, there were better and funnier films this year. My number 11 film is The Jazz Singer with a 7 out of 10, and while it is widely praised for ushering in the era of synchronized sound films, there remain many obvious flaws with the film, which I covered in my episode about it. Still, the film is a landmark and should be seen at least once if you are a film lover. We enter the top 10 with Chang, A Drama of the Wilderness, and The Patent Leather Kid coming in at 10 and 9, essentially tied when all my math worked out, but still both receiving a 7 overall. As with The Racket, I think The Patent Leather Kid worked better in the source material, but this film did a better job adapting it, and Barthelmess's acting certainly helped, while Chang benefited from an exotic location to shoot in. At number 8, I have The Last Command, still with a 7 out of 10. Emil Jannings is haunting in the story, and out of the 2 films set mainly during the Russian Revolution, this one far surpasses Tempest. And my last 7 out of 10 goes to the 7th film from this Oscars, Street Angel. I think this film is Janet Gaynor's best performance out of the 3 she was nominated for, and overall was one of the better shot films of the year despite a slightly lackluster storyline. My first 8 goes to The Crowd in 6th place. King Vidor delivers an incredible film with equal parts comedy and drama, and this one is definitely on my list to return to in the future. The Best Unique and Artistic Picture winner comes in at 5th on my list. Sunrise, A Song of Two Human gets an 8 in my book, and I might have given it a 9 if it had stuck a little closer to the source material. That said, it is still an excellent film and should be seen by all. Speedy takes the number 4 slot on my list with an 8 out of 10, and if I was grading on enjoyment alone, this would be at the top of the list. The film is hilarious, and the humor holds up incredibly well to this day. If you've never seen any of Harold Lloyd's films, this one is a great starting point. We move into the top 3 with Sadie Thompson, grabbing my last 8 of the year. The film is led by the incredible talent of Gloria Swanson, who should have won the Best Picture award in my opinion. She plays probably the strongest woman we get to see on screen in all of these films, yet it is Gaynor who is awarded the prize for roles portraying meek characters instead. I guess that says a little something about where things stand as a society and film industry today versus 100 years ago, but again, probably a topic for a future podcast. At number 2 is Chaplin's The Circus, just inching up over the mark that rounds it up to a 9 out of 10. Chaplin's tramp is in excellent form in the film, and his vision for the story is so clear from beginning to end. It's one of the few films from the first Oscars that ends on any sort of down note, and I appreciate Chaplin for being willing to take that risk when audiences wanted feel-good stories. And last but not least, my number 1 film of the first Academy Awards is the Outstanding Picture winner itself, Wings. Today, this might qualify as a 4-quadrant film, and it definitely has something for everyone. You want action? What better than planes and dogfights? Drama? Have a love triangle involving 2 bitter rivals turned best friends fighting over the same girl. Comedy? You get an entire sequence of a character chasing bubbles on screen while he's drunk. There's very little to complain about in this film, even 98 years later, with the possible exception that the existing version is a tad too long. The film is the first in a long line of war films to win Best Picture, including All Quiet on the Western Front in 1930, Casablanca in 1943, From Here to Eternity in 1953, Patton in 1970, Platoon in 1986, Schindler's List in 1993, and The Hurt Locker in 2009. And despite being a biopic, you could technically count last year's winner Oppenheimer as a war movie as well. So that's it for the first Academy Awards. I hope you enjoyed these episodes discussing the films. I will be taking a bit of a break in the lead up to the 97th Academy Awards just 9 days from today, but there will be daily episodes next week breaking down every category of this year's awards. And as I mentioned at the top of the episode, I still have a handful of slots open for guests to join me on the next round of discussions about the films from the second Academy Awards. Check the show notes or leave a comment in this episode's post on Substack if you are interested in being on the show. And to make sure you get all the latest award season news and information, sign up for the Oscar Project newsletter at theoscarproject.substack.com. You'll receive reviews, weekly previews of coming movies every Thursday, and access to contests and challenges throughout the year. Speaking of challenges, you still have time to enter my annual Oscar prediction contest until Saturday, March 1st. I'll include a link to that in the show notes as well. The Oscar Project podcast is written and produced by me, Jonathan Eacherberg, with editing assistance from Joshua Eacherberg. And don't forget to come back for next week's episodes as we count down to the 97th Academy Awards. Until then, I hope to see you at the movies.